So, my name is Jo Burke. I'm the program director for the Northern Illinois University Art Museum. Our current exhibition, now extended through May 14th, is the NIU School of Art and Design Faculty Biennial. And in conjunction with this exhibition, we've been hosting a number of virtual faculty presentations. These are recorded and will be posted at a later date on our website. This evening's program, The Wandering Mind, is an artist talk given by NIU printmaking professor and Presidential Research Scholarship and Artistry professor Michael Barnes. Professor Barnes holds his MFA in printmaking from the University of Iowa. He is a specialist in lithography and intaglio techniques. He has been artist in residence at Steindruck Munchen in Munich, Germany, the Auckland Print Studio in Auckland, New Zealand, L'Atelier Le Grand Village in Massignac, France, and the Franz Masereel Centrum Residency in Casterly, Belgium. He is the recipient of a Fulbright Specialist Award from the Center for Graphic Art and Visual Research in Belgrade, Serbia, an honorable mention for the Carmen Arozino Award from the Brita Prince in Madrid, Spain, and an Illinois Arts Council Individual Artist Fellowship Award. Professor Barnes is represented by Davidson Gallery in Seattle, Washington, Campbell Street Gallery in Marion, Iowa, and Broomfield Gallery in Boise, Idaho. At NIU, he is the founder and faculty host for Bandelier Press. Please join me in welcoming Michael Barnes as he shares with us a glimpse into his wandering mind. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
This one.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight to listen to my lecture. I will start a screen share. I've given a few of the lectures over the. Oops, hang on one second. Sorry.
You should have control.
Okay. Yeah, I opened the file before I started the share. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I've given lectures a few times over the last number of years for the faculty exhibitions. So I was hoping to, change it up a little bit to kind of focus on my work a little bit more and kind of give you a progression. I have a couple of studio shots here to explain what I do with my process. I'm a drawer and printmaker mostly. I dabble in painting once in a while. I'm not very good at painting, so I kind of focus more on the drawing aspect. I love storytelling, so I'm very involved in creating narratives. And so the wandering mind, I guess, is sort of my description of myself as to how I go about making my work. And excuse me. Put my narratives together and my stories. So a lot of them come from these sketches that I create, and I don't keep a traditional sketchbook like a lot of people do. A lot of artists do really nice sketchbooks. I have just a general sketch pad, and I'll rip them out, lay them out on the table, and I'll put them in a box. And when I'm done using them, so they all kind of lay out and start speaking to each other, and I find the ones that kind of work with a particular image. This is a piece I was working on in St. Louis at Evil Prints, which is a print studio in downtown St. Louis. This is an image of me drawing on the stone. So it's a drawing on limestone. It's a Bavarian limestone. This is a really nice dark gray stone, which is the most sought after stones. And the drawing is done with a grease pencil. And then it goes through some processing steps. So the non-image area becomes water loving, whereas the drawing becomes ink receptive. And so you keep the surface wet, you sponge over it, and then you roll over it with ink. And the ink, at the end, I have a little video of me rolling up a stone. So the process was invented in 1798, and it was a wonderful process for recreating tonal drawings. Before that, it was woodcut and engraving, which were very, very time-consuming, tedious processes to reproduce images. Kind of the closest to this might have been mezzotint, which is an etching engraving technique in the intaglio process. So lithography really transformed the printing world and allowed artists to draw directly on a stone and to print that drawing, looking much like the original, almost like a graphite drawing. So I've really worked a lot with this process over the years. This is a photo of me in the studio in Munich a few summers ago before the pandemic. And I worked there for 2 months making work. So I do a lot of work at residencies, and I'll talk a little bit about that. This is a shot of me processing that stone, putting the gum arabic solution with a little bit of acid on it. It does kind of a mild etching process and transforms the drawing into a grease base that attracts the ink, and then that's inked up and printed onto paper. So this is an example of the final print with some color added to it, and I have a better shot of that later on in the sequence. So kind of going back into some of my earlier work, this is a shot of my sketches all kind of put up on a wall for an installation I did at the Rockford Art Museum a few years ago. So the sketches kind of have a second life other than just living in a box. I've actually sold a few of the sketches. I never thought of doing that, but somebody wanted to buy one. And I was like, okay. They were kind of hard to part with because they're kind of part of my, they're my thoughts. So that's kind of selling part of your family. But I did sell a couple of them, but most of them I still have in boxes in my studio. Some are on little pieces of scrap paper. I did an installation like this for one of the faculty shows as well a few years ago. Some of you might have seen that. So a lot of them will have minutes from agendas from faculty meetings and things like that. So I'm drawing all the time. This goes back into some of my early drawings, kind of to give you a little bit of a background as to where I come from and kind of how my work got to where it's at today. This is my dad posed for this, it's sort of this interpretation of, the guy sitting in the backyard mowing his lawn, and how nice it'd be if you had little TVs that could walk out to you. And so it's just using my imagination for this, complete absurd scene. And that sort of evolved into these drawings. I did a lot of work growing up in mid-Michigan, working class family in the countryside. I've always had this kind of bent towards anti-corporation art. Social realism is something that's always been like the Ashcan School. American realists have always really struck a nerve with me, or they've not struck a nerve with me, but they been great inspiration for me. So these were a few of the drawings that I did kind of through my graduate school period in these kind of post-apocalyptic landscapes that maybe have been ravaged by industry, ravaged by corporate farming. Around where my parents live is really getting ravaged by corporate farming these days. They have wind turbines all around them now. They have giant dairy farms. A lot of the land's been bought up by international farming corporations, so it's almost becoming impossible for small families to own farms anymore. I still have some family in the farming industry, but it's difficult. So these are also inspired by science fiction and kind of speculative fiction, like the writings of Philip K. Dick and Kurt Vonnegut. And also cinema, science fiction cinema. So this is my interpretation of all the corporate execs going off for a conference. They're all carrying their briefcases. So this was a piece that, kind of took me into grad school. I got a full scholarship at Iowa, which was one of the, still is one of the top ranked printmaking programs in the country. Mauricio Lasansky was, sort of the legend at Iowa who made a big name for it. So I went there for 3 years after college in Michigan, a small school in Michigan. And this was the work that really kind of took me into what I'm doing today. I was kind of still working with similar themes, but, feeling like I was getting a little bit better with my control of drawing and the medium, tightening things up. These are etchings that were about 24 by 18. So I did some pretty good size etchings, which is a very time consuming process. So a piece like this took me almost 6 months to complete. And this was my kind of my masterpiece of my grad program. It was like 24 by 36 etching. It took almost my whole final year of grad school. So I was doing lithography at the time as well. So I was really kind of getting into experimenting with texture, and I took the figure out of the pieces at this point, just to really kind of explore the objects in the space and the environments, and also the color and process, kind of really getting into the medium of lithography. I discovered I could draw a lot quicker in lithography, and I also loved the process and the history of it. So I did a number of these color pieces during that time, these kind of logical flying machines, hovering over these kind of wastelands. This one's kind of a labyrinth in the background. Layering a lot of texture plates, a lot of colors, just really kind of trying a lot of different things. A lot of them have drawing worked back into them, so they're not all edition prints. And then when I moved to California for a couple of years, and then I got the job at NIU in 1998. So I moved back to the Midwest, which was a welcome change. I enjoyed California, but I'm a Midwesterner, so I was really happy to come home, and knew the reputation of NIU, and with David Dreisbach and Dorothea Builder and Robert Bornhuter, who were the printmakers here, and I was really excited to kind of become part of the legacy at NIU, and help kind of take it into the sort of the new generation. So when I moved up here, I had we have a big press in the studio, and I never really had a big press for the few years after I was in grad school. So I was really excited, and there weren't a lot of grad students at that time. I kind of built the program up a little more over the years. So I kind of, over the summers, I had the studio to myself. So I just went in there and camped out and made a lot of these these are big collograph prints. So some of them were up to like close to like 5 by 8 feet. So they were the biggest prints I'd created to that point. So it was really exciting to work at that scale. And I worked very, each one of these is unique. I worked back into them with Shin-Kalei processes, collaging, drawing. But I really missed the narrative. So the narrative is kind of implied in these, but I really kind of wanted to get back to, doing the figurative work. So this body of work that I created from grad school through this period, with using the textures and the colors, came back into the figurative work in this way. So I started using them as backgrounds to build up some of the environments. And I really loved how that worked, how that sort of merged with the figurative drawings, and kind of creating these spaces that were different than kind of these packed narratives. I was experimenting with digital technology, which was relatively new to the print medium. When I was in grad school, we were just kind of starting to get into some of the digital technology and photo plates. So this was something that was kind of exciting to experiment with. These squiggly things along the bottom were actually night crawlers. I went to a bait shop and bought night crawlers and put them on a scanner, and they were still alive, so they were moving around as I was scanning them. But I really loved how they formed this kind of strange text, this strange language. So I incorporated them into the piece as kind of this hidden code as to what the meaning of the piece is, and let the viewer kind of sort that out. A lot of them are just these solitary figures that are, there's kind of these themes of communication that, wind through the work. Communication or lack of communication, relationships, human relationships with each other, with themselves, with their environments. So a lot of the figures are kind of in these vacuous worlds. They're, yelling, and it's just coming out the other end. I put cicadas in this because they make that loud, almost obnoxious sound. And then I'd read that cicadas don't have ears. They can't, they probably feel vibrations, but they don't have that same kind of hearing that humans have. And so that moved into a series that I called The New Breed. So it was kind of my development of these strange creatures that are often kind of bound up in their environments, interacting with other objects, other beings, kind of, strange combinations. This one's called the attraction. So there's this, this kind of theme of humans' desire to domesticate, to control, to arrange our world around us so that it fits our needs. Um, Environmental themes kind of have always kind of been present in the work, coming and going. This figure's attempting to control this little car, and technology is around him, but things are kind of breaking down. There was a, a story I read by E.M. Forster right around this time that really influenced a series of works called The Machine Stops. And it's really about that, how humans became so reliant upon their technology that when the technology broke down, that they didn't know how to exist any longer. So the machine stopped, and then they're stuck in their pods and not able to really cope. So I kind of, feel in many ways, I have a real cynical, dark humor look at the world, but I see a lot of these things as kind of prevalent, and in our everyday society. This is this figure is kind of dealing with this idea of parenthood, and being needed by something else, having to care for something else. And in the back there's the shadow of the tail coming up and confronting the figure, and kind of this self-doubt, the self. So there's this kind of introspection in some of the work, as well as self-investigation, as well as just kind of general social commentary, social satire. This one's called The Optimist. This figure is bobbing for apples. He's kind of trying to hold on to the past. He's trying to hold on to the things that he remembered as the the good parts of his world, as things change around him. And some of this has to do with sort of our ability to change and desire to change. And it's something that I've dealt with myself a lot, growing up in a small farm town, and moving to cities, living in cities like Los Angeles, and then up, this area around Chicago, and then also just kind of in general life, dealing with, the changes of technology, for the, the good and the bad of it. There's a lot of fantastic things with technology, but they also, sometimes they change so fast that it's hard to keep up with them. So when you're taught to type on a hand typewriter, and then you move into computers, and now you're texting on your cell phone with one hand. So there's this, and then just in the world of drawing, a lot of our students now are working with iPads and technology that just, it moves so fast, that I'm always, working very hard to keep up on myself. But I love the traditional processes, and I'm working with a process called, lithography is a little over 200 years old, which is young compared to, some of the ancient processes that are thousands of years old. But I love the techniques, and things are changing. The digital technology has kind of pushed out a lot of the traditional lithography, some of the chemistry, we work on limestone. It's still kind of the antique printing process. But I like using it in ways with new technology that, it's still viable, still really interesting to me. So this figure is kind of set out to drift. This was called Considering Extinction. And there's just kind of, themes of these kinds of themes of, the absurdity of humanity, kind of looking at the human condition and our own coping in life, and how we all cope with it differently. This is a piece that I actually hope to incorporate into a series of playing cards. I'm going to be writing a sabbatical proposal, and that's kind of one of my key points of the sabbatical, is to do a series that really investigates card games and different kind of roles that games have played throughout history and in our cultures, and also kind of the way the cards reflect different, there's different kinds of symbolism built into the deck of 52 cards, and other kind of games that played some sort of social role or some sort of social political role, in addition to folklore. So some of the pieces that I have coming up here are going to talk a little bit more about folklore and kind of, how that can be used as an artistic. You can sort of use that for your own devices to kind of develop your own kind of narratives. These are some pieces, a couple of pieces that I did on a trip to Poland, and I've done a number of different residency trips to different places in the world. And I always enjoy this because I can learn some new practices, learn some new techniques. This is a reductive process, scratching into the stone, much like scratchboard drawing, but it's a part of the lithography printing history that this was a new way of doing it that I hadn't discovered before. So I was working with an asphaltum base and scratching away the drawing. These are some characters, just kind of strange creatures that are, wandering through their worlds, and surviving in their world. So I visited my aunt outside of San Antonio in Texas, and they lived on a ranch out in the countryside, and everything out there just looked like it was going to kill you. everything was dried and sharp, and or it either stab you, bite you, or you just sort of die from dehydration. It's a kind of a tough world, but there was also a beauty to it. So they had these little ponds, and I'd go around with my aunt, and she'd throw food out to the carp that were in the ponds, and she called them the lakes. But they're full of mesquite trees and sagebrush, and so this was kind of my little landscape, mixing that world with kind of my Michigan dwellings, with the cabin in the woods and the deer stand back there. And this is a piece. I've used the Tower of Babel in a few different images, kind of dealing with I grew up in a very religious family, so there's religious themes that come and go in the work. I quite often use them to address social political events in the world. Not only religious belief systems, but also the communication and tolerance for all the different kinds of religions we have in the world, and different cultures we have, and just kind of how humans in general interact. So these kind of strange figures are kind of existing in their different, almost like they're within the same body, but are separated, so they're not able to communicate with each other, much like the Tower of Babel story, where the languages were changed and people couldn't communicate and finish the structure. It's another piece that deals with some biblical imagery and themes, and also my own relationship with religion, growing up with a family that's still very religious, and my own sort of reactions to that. Another series I started on a residency, it was in Belgium. I started this boat series, and I was kind of thinking of them much like that, it's similar sense of the Tower of Babel, but with Noah's Ark, and kind of the the vessel that's collecting the last remnants of civilization and carrying them off to wherever it's going to carry them off to, and working in some of my strange creatures. So this one's called The Harvest, and this kind of steampunk ships floating around collecting things. And then as I was working on that boat series, I found all these postcards in an antique shop in Michigan, and it's called The Language of Flowers. And there was just something kind of, I thought ridiculous about spelling these words out in flowers with these pretty, little pretty scenes in the background. But in the pieces I was working on at the time, I was like, wow, these would actually be kind of nice as post greeting cards. So I started doing my own series of greeting cards, and these are like 30 by 40-inch lithographs, and using the flowers, and some of them I just used the text. It was just kind of the idea of using the text that I liked. It's all dry land. was a saying my grandpa used to, my grandpa always had these wonderful sayings. It's all dry land. He said, I have a bone to pick with you, or, you know, he had a whole list of sayings that he would always use. So I kind of did this in tribute to my grandpa, and we'd used to fish a lot. So this was the giant fish that got away, I guess. Jumps into the boat, where the boat's almost becoming, you know, sanctuary for the fish at this point. All in a day's work. So, you know, one of the jobs I did growing up was working on the farm, and we would pick up rocks. So, you know, this has shown up in a few different my pieces, with, you know, picking up rocks and kind of that, you know, repetitive tasks that we do in life. And sometimes there just doesn't feel like there's any end to it. You just get done doing something, and there's always more to do. So we'd pick up the rocks in the field, and then my boss would drive over it with the tractor and dig the field up again, and there were more rocks. So we'd go right back and pick up more rocks. So when I go back home, those rock piles are still there. So I go out and throw them in my car to bring home for landscaping. Now they get good money for all those rocks, those field stones. Wish you were here. That's just, you know, just kind of a, you know, I had to do this one. So the sinking ship. And then this was the last piece I did in this series. And I left the text out because I wanted the image to just stand on its own to the end of the world. So I talked about my residencies a little bit. Some of my research that I do to come up with my images, I get a little carried away sometimes. I was working in France at this studio, and they left me out in the countryside for a couple of weeks while the studio owner went back to Paris. And my French is really bad. I speak a little bit, just enough to get to the grocery store and ask where things are. But I was really out there by myself, and I started going a little stir crazy. So I started doing some kind of crazy things to, you know, get ideas for prints. And there's this old wheelbarrow that was out in the barn. And so I went out in the yard one day. I spent a whole day doing this, photographing myself in different positions, and then playing around on the computer to get it, you know, using Photoshop to recreate this. Because I had this idea for the print, which is slightly different. I just thought it'd be funny to have myself pushing myself in a wheelbarrow. But this is how it ended up in the print. So that's kind of an example of the ends I'll go to generate ideas for some of my pieces. And then there's a lot of other elements in that studio in France. There was a lot of old farm, you know, old instruments laying around, baskets, old chestnut baskets, and paddles for, you know, the bread ovens, and some of those showed up in pieces as well. And then just my constant love of history, art history, and my love for the Northern Renaissance painters, Peter Bruegel, Hieronymus Bosch. This is a Bruegel painting that's in the Pinakothek in Munich, and it's a land of Das Schlafenland. So it's the land of cocaine, or the land of sloth. So the figures, you know, these people have eaten and, you know, partook too much in good foods, and so they're laying around sleeping. So they've all become drunk and lazy. But I love Bruegel and Bosch's worlds that they create. You know, I'm looking at them in a different context from what they lived in back in the you know, in the 15th, 16th century. But you know, I just love the little demons and little creatures wandering around. The little egg down in the front with a knife sticking out of it, that, you know, he has a little cracked egg with legs. There's all these wonderful little devices that Bosch and Bruegel both embedded into the work. There's a lot of proverbs and, you know, meaning to each one of the things that they paint. They're very, you know, they were very intentional. So I was working in Munich, and I kind of worked that idea into this piece. So this was a little bit about my experience of working in Munich in the studio. I had a shop that I lived in for 2 months in the center of Munich, and it was kind of a great experience. A little chaotic at times, being right in the city center. A lot of it's very noisy early in the morning often, and, you know, then at night the clubs kick in, and so I'm in there trying to print, and there's like clubbers going past the windows of the shop yelling at me, and it's so there was always some kind of activity. So this is a little bit about my experience in Munich and making my prints in the studio there. Then one of the trips I took, I discovered these murals in this little village near the castle Neuschwanstein, Obergammerau, which is a village where they reenact the Passion plays, I think every other year. And the whole town's filled with these wonderful murals, frescoes on the buildings. And the one on the right, I had to pull an image off the internet because I saw it in the vehicle I was in was moving too fast, and I didn't get a chance to snap a picture. So I looked it up, and it's the animals of Bremen. It's the town musicians of Bremen from the Brothers Grimm, and the animals wandered off from their farms and to find a better life in Bremen. And on the way, they discovered a farmhouse that was being robbed, and so they stood up on top of each other and cackled and barked and whinnied and scared the robbers away. And then they moved into the house, and the robbers came back at night, and it was dark, and the animals all attacked them. And so they thought the house was possessed with witches, so they ran off and were gone forever. So the animals stayed there and lived happily ever after. So I just love this narrative, and I've been getting more into reading some of the old folklore, and some of the Brothers Grimm, the original versions some are very dark. So there's some really kind of interesting stories that they tell. But I really enjoyed this one because the animals on their quest and journey to find the perfect place to exist found something that was wonderful for them. So that idea of through life, sometimes those things can, the right place can sort of come up on you by chance, without you anticipating it. When you're always looking for the grass is greener, and then sometimes it's it comes up sooner. So this is my interpretation of that story, and I've recreated it with my own creatures. So that's a series of work that I would like to get into, and explore the folklores more and my reinterpretation of them, because that's what I love to do. I love to tell my own stories. I think about oral traditions and how that game where you started off where somebody tells you something, and then you tell the next person tells the next person. By the time it comes back around the circle, the story has changed so much. So this idea of the traditions of oral histories and oral passing down the stories and the folklore and such, I like that idea, how I can make it my own and translate it into my own world. So I'm really kind of fascinated with pursuing a series in this line. So this is really the last kind of body of work that I working up to what I'm doing now. These are some pieces from maybe 5-6 years ago that I did in France. Those are the bread paddles I talked about, these giant bread paddles, because the studio's in an old farmhouse. It's in an old cattle barn, a cobblestone cattle barn that he's completely cleaned up and renovated into a print studio. And so there's still some of these old objects laying around from the old farm. So I grabbed the bread paddles, and I was like, oh, these would be great for these characters to be holding. So they're arcs in the background, and they're wandering out through the landscape aimlessly, trying to collect whatever they're collecting. This was a series of 30 by 40. I think these were in one of the faculty shows. I did a set of 3 of these, concealing the source, tending to critical matters, and assuming the burden. So these are again really kind of addressing absurdities of human humanity, as well as the sort of the human condition, and our kind of some of the daily mundane activities we do in life. And this is a series I did in a residency in New Zealand. This is a Curse of Onahanga. The title came from, I was staying with the studio director who lived in Onahanga, and we had a lot of trouble with this print. So I kind of called it that in homage to his hometown. It worked out in the end, but we had a lot of kind of technical. I think this first one is when I showed I was gumming the stone in the earlier picture. The gum got underneath the stone and glued it to the table, so we couldn't get it off the table. We had to soak it for like 3 days to get it off the table. And then when we were printing, it got really hot, and so the image kind of got dark, and we had to fight. We fought it all the way through, but it came out nice. So these were dealing a little bit with ideas of colonialism and kind of what colonialism will do to do to the world. People from other cultures coming in and trying to change it to their way of existence and their liking. And then this is the series I did in Munich, part of it. They're all roughly 24-inch square stones that were part of an institute that Alois Sennefelder, who was the inventor of lithography, had directed in Munich. He lived in Munich when he invented lithography. So it was kind of exciting working on these stones that were part of Sennefelder's history. I did 8 pieces in 8 weeks. I did them in black and white, and I brought them home and worked the color up at home over the last 2 years. And I finished these in 2020. So the last couple of years I've been working on some other projects, but haven't gotten into a big series like this. You can see how the color in the background. So the key image is pretty stark, and then with the color stones and plates, I work up a lot of so each color is in a separate layer. So the yellow is a separate plate, blue is a separate plate, and I stack all the colors up to get the full range. This is the kind of me fighting the the world, fighting lithography, I guess is what I called it. I was having problems rolling my stone up one day, and so I was like, oh, lithography, why am I doing this? So this is my little litho creature fighting me. Some things are best forgotten. So these characters are kind of digging up their past for better and for worse. This one's called Breaking of the Stones. So it's kind of these nobility type figures that are, these figures of power that are, just completely absurd, and they're trying to ride these rocks. They're trying to tame the rocks. And the title was a bit foreshadowing, because this happened when I was printing. So this is what you do not want to happen in lithography. You don't want your stone to break. So it was very unfortunate, but the stone separated from the backing stone and cracked right up at the top edge. But they took the stone and mounted it to the wall in the common area of the studio. So it's been immortalized there. In the back of the stone's still usable, but it didn't crack all the way through. And then this was the last piece I made in Munich, and this is kind of a homage to my daily walks through the Englischer garden. And I'm out there with it's my little self-portrait, the shriveled up little lithographer drawing away. And the strange plants are coming to life around me. And then since Munich, really kind of the main pieces I've made, larger pieces, are these two here, are the He Who Knows Best that I made in St. Louis. And this one's called A Moment to Spare. And I made this back in the studio in France. I went back there for a short visit. And last couple of years with the pandemic has been kind of difficult. I've been doing a lot of drawing and some smaller projects, but I'm kind of ready to get into a new series. I really spent a lot of time finishing up the Munich, the set of 8 prints in the Munich series, as well as these last 2 with color. And so I'm moving forward into some new pieces that I don't really have images of yet, because they're still kind of in the works. But it's kind of where my work is at this point. This is a short video of the process. I'll kind of speed up through it. what I do is I wash the drawing out with solvent. The drawing is coated with a gum arabic solution, and then I rub it up with a asphaltum solution, which is very grease loving, or we even been using some waxy materials now. And I roll it up with ink solid, and the gum arabic is water loving, so the gum arabic will always come off the stone. So the gum will lift off the stone, and then I roll over it with ink, keep it wet, and charge it up with ink. And I don't show the printing process here, but the printing process is basically you lay a sheet of paper on this and run it through the press, and the press applies pressure to the back of the paper and presses the ink into the paper. So this is a more recent piece that I finished up, but it didn't really kind of fit the other series that I was doing. I was doing this for another project. So that's it.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure to journey with you and go back and see some of your work as it's evolved over the years. Can you, if anyone would like to unmute and comment or ask questions or put your comments in the chat, please go ahead.
I had a question. Do you know David Becker's work from University of Madison or
Yep.
University of Wisconsin-Madison?
Yeah, he was actually one of my big influences when I was an undergrad. So those old etchings were, he was a visiting artist at my undergraduate school at Elma College in Michigan. And I fell in love with his work. Between him and Evan Summer, who was a visiting artist here a couple of years ago, I finally brought him in. He taught at Kutztown in Pennsylvania. But yeah, I have one of his big prints in my studio. I love it.
I have one of his big prints in my dining room.
Oh, good. They're they're kind of dark images to have in your dining room, but I appreciate that. I get that also. I get it. It's like, well, that's kind of a dark image to hang in my bedroom.
Yeah, his work is on that side, but it's just fantastic. And I can see his influence on your work. You know, it's different, but there is the surrealistic aspect that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you know the illustrator Tom Herzberg?
I don't know that person.
Yeah, because he does a lot of unusual little creatures, and he calls them his caprices.
Oh, okay.
And they're similar to yours, so you might want to look at that also.
Yeah. Well, feel free to my email is just mbarnes@niu.edu. So if you want to send me questions, feel free to do so. So I'm always around the art building on the 4th floor. Not always, but quite often. We have our MFA show in Chicago this coming Friday, the April 1st, from 5 to 8. It's at ARC Gallery. So if you get a chance to come to the city and see what our MFAs have been doing, it's a great show. We hung it yesterday. And there's a exhibition in the also in the Nat and Jerry Johns Gallery, and Ina Murphy just installed her work today, so she has her Time Arts MFA show. So,
how long is the show going to be up at ARC?
It'll be mostly through the month. I think it's maybe towards the. They stay up for about 3 weeks.
Okay.
So I think it opens today and it runs probably till like April 28th or something like that.
Okay.
I should let you guys know we're gearing up for a silent auction at the Art Museum with several pieces donated by some of the School of Art faculty, including Michael Barnes. Also Sasha Bitzer, Jessica Labatt, Nina Rizzo, John Siblick, Ben Stone, Chrissy Stakidis, Peter Van Ale, and Chesha Wang. There was also some work donated by Friends of the NIU Art Museum from their collections, as well as Pete and I putting some of our work in as well. And there's prints by Honoré Daumier and Francisco Goya, John James Audubon, David Dreisbach, Jay Ryan. So there's some nice pieces in there. It'll run from April 5th through May 6th, with the bidding ending 2 p.m. May 6th. And the goal for this year's silent auction is to raise funds for the museum to make a targeted purchase to help diversify the collection. We're hoping to be able to purchase some prints from the Brandywine Print Workshop, which is a diversity-driven printmaking studio dedicated to promoting the works of underrepresented artists. So that's coming up too.
I'll be coming by to look.
And to bid, please.
I'll bid. Don't worry about that. I'm bad.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting me, and thank you everyone for coming to listen. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good to
you.
see everyone.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.